Yes. So there we go. I think we are recording. So welcome everybody. I'm putting this, my name is Dinsmore-Tuli and let's go to the gallery view. Yeah, my name is Dinsmore-Tuli and I am delighted to welcome to this interview Ramdas, psychotherapist, yogi, dear colleague and friend, done amazing research about Yoga Nidra, and I asked him the question, how long have you been teaching and sharing Yoga Nidra, and how's it changed over the years? Because you've changed hats. You started out as a yogi, then you trained as an occupational therapist, now you're a psychotherapist. Has Yoga Nidra been a thread throughout? How long have you been at this?
Yeah, it definitely has been a thread. It's probably been the thread that ties it all together, actually. I've not really thought about that, but yeah, that's probably it. It's been the thing. And I guess when I first started as a yoga teacher, I could see all the benefits. People would go, oh yeah, this is amazing, and they'd tell me these amazing stories. And then, you know, there was a kind of something in me, probably after the 2008 financial crash, I just realized that kind of lost a lot of work as a yoga teacher. Really, this is what happened. And I thought, well, what am I going to do here? And how can I progress the subject? And I think there's a lot of discussion about how can we get more yoga into the NHS? How can we make it more accessible? And I thought, you know what, if I don't train as a health professional, if people like me who are really motivated to do it, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? So I thought, okay, I'm going to step up here. And I just went into the NHS with a view of doing clinical research in the field and seeing what could happen with it.
So that was your intention. You went into the British National Health Service, training up as an occupational therapist with the specific intent to, like a Trojan horse, to get the Yoga Nidra in. And you did this great research in your occupational therapy training, didn't you? Do you want to speak a bit about that?
Yeah, I can talk a lot about that, actually. But yeah, we, as part of our training, we had to do some clinical research. And with occupational therapy, it's about understanding the meaning of the things that we do. Why do we do things? How do we do them? Where do we do them? But also then, you know, when you try to understand it from that perspective, you can begin to get the insight into not just, let's say, for instance, how I might experience Yoga Nidra, but what about the way that other people do it too? What about the kind of shared or collective experience of practice of Yoga Nidra? What's that about? So I wanted to do some research, scientific research, but I wanted to do it from not the perspective of trying to prove or disprove something, but just trying to understand what do people experience in Yoga Nidra. So I did a study of what's called phenomenological analysis, where I did some in-depth interviews with people about the experience of Yoga Nidra. And then I typed it all up, word by word. Being dyslexic, you can tell me it took me just so long. And then I just had all the text on the walls for about 6 months. And I locked myself in that room for about 6 months, just looking at everything that people had said, line by line, just a pure track on this information that people have been talking about with Yoga Nidra. And out of that, I just realized, wow, you know, the connections that people have, the variety of experiences that people have, but also the kind of some of the themes that people have as well. And that was really important to me because, well, I think there's actually a bit of a political statement about this way of doing research.
Yeah.
Because traditionally, we have all the power in the teacher, and the teacher says this, and you do this, and this is what happens. And I think we need to shift that when we try to understand actually how much of our learning does really come from our internal experiences, from our own. Yeah, sure, we might learn a practice, but that actual change, where does that come from? Isn't that as equal? Isn't that, you know, when you have a power dynamics, they inherently become open to abuse. So we need to do something to shift that. And part of this clinical research was about not just trying to prove this or the other, but actually getting people's voices and helping people recognize that actually what goes on the inside of you, you know what, that's the real learning. That's the real.
And that's what I love about the research. We have to post a link so that people can have a read, because what was unique about what Ramdas did in 2013 when you did the research was actually to let the voices of the people be heard. And the thing I remember about it mostly was that there was this sense that people said that it kind of gave them a holiday from themselves, like a break from the effort of having to be yourself, this idea of this sort of persona, this kind of frontage of who you had to be. And it seemed like almost that was one of the common experiences, that almost everybody reported that. And would you say that's an accurate response to what I learned from your research, was that actually Yoga Nidra is a technology for freedom? That's what I learned from it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's that there's so many different ways that people experience. Some people might feel it as a freedom from who they are or their own identity. But then also later on in kind of clinical work, what I've began to understand is, you know, when somebody goes through a real period of illness, serious illness, you can lose your identity in that illness, from being very able-bodied to being disabled very quickly. So how do you find yourself in that? And then how do you identify with that massive change that people have gone through? So when you go through that, something like Yoga Nidra, there's so much potential there for you to just connect to and one of the themes that came out of the research was just an expanding view of self. So it can ask those questions, who am I? But then it can also give you that insight into, hang on, I'm not just this. I'm not just what you see when you look in the mirror. Who else am I really? And it can give people that lived experience. So there's that aspect of it, this kind of view of who you are and this kind of sense of spirituality. But then on the other side, on the other end, there's also just a kind of practical day-to-day, you know what, I've had a stressful day, I just need to chill out. And that was really profound for me, because there's a lot of talk about relaxation and kind of awareness practices and mindfulness. And there's a lot of talk about spirituality, but where does the two meet? And this is the thing, when you start to really listen to people, what they experience, it starts to join the dots. And I think this is one of the things that was really interesting for me in the research, that people start to go, okay, well, hang on, what's happening here? I'm going around my body in this way, so I'll settle a bit, and I go around my body, and then hang on, where's my body gone? You know, okay, so hang on, my body's not there, okay, but then I've got these memories, I've got these thoughts, I've got all these feelings, I've got these things that's going on, and then you go through a certain process of pairs of opposites and breathing and visualization, etc., affirmation, and what happens in that 20 minutes? Wow, what magic, you know? So if you're in a yoga tea, you're sitting and you're watching, but you don't know what's going on inside of people, you know? So to actually have that space, and it took a lot of time to create that safe space. I wouldn't say it's something you can do all the time, because you really need to create a safe space to be able to do that. But having that opportunity to really listen and get people to connect to it, that's really profound. And the stuff that came out, the mechanisms behind it, unbelievable. What healing, the story that we were doing, incredible.
It's really beautiful to hear you speak about Yoga Nidra as such a personal and empowering practice at many levels. But I did want to pick up a little thing that you mentioned, that often when people think about Yoga Nidra, they think about reading out a script that was written by a Swami who wrote a book that everybody reads. And actually, this is where, for me, there's an intersection between my work in Yoga Nidra and my work as an activist to eradicate abuse in yoga. Because you mentioned how often there's a teacher, even with the researching experience, there's the person with the power, and they tell everyone else what to do. And Yoga Nidra can be a bit like that sometimes. And my work in trying to train teachers to ask questions and see that comes in a post-lineage way, a way kind of beyond those guru lineages. And I know you and I share a previous connection to a quite an oppressive, hierarchical kind of organization that shared Nidra in a certain way. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about how your work now as a psychotherapist gives you a bit of an insight on how Yoga Nidra can be like trauma informed, safe and healing, rather than being this thing that you lay it down and this is how you do it, and you don't, you know, all of that. To me, I mean, I know I've been doing it 20 years. It's really evolved in the times. I'd love to hear about your perspective, particularly now that you're a psychotherapist. You might have insights on this capacity to make sure Yoga Nidra is not an abusive tool.
It's a really interesting question, because there's so much, and it's so complicated and yet so subtle as well, in the way that you can, you know, teach a practice like Yoga Nidra. So can you follow a script? Big question mark. Okay. I think what, you know, so on a practical scale, there's lots of good work that's been done in terms of trauma-informed yoga, isn't there? Not leading people, not trying to color things too much in a way that you feel you can control it. So, and allowing people a safe space, but also at the same time, you have to really hold the space, but at the same time, you can't give too much coloration. How much choice can you give as well? That's an interesting question. I think there's a real way that people have evolved in teaching Yoga Nidra, where it might have been feel this, feel that. And now you have to be a lot more sensitive to that and kind of go, actually, hang on. You know, if you're teaching, say, pair of opposites or something, or visualization, you might invite people to, if it feels okay. You might give people a safe space to come back to if they need it, all those kind of things. So there's a lot of kind of technical things that you can do in Yoga Nidra to make it much safer, much more informed from that perspective. But ultimately, I think it comes down to being a really safe and steady pair of hands and having a good relationship with the people that you're working with. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
So if people, you know, if you've got a good relationship with somebody, that will hold a lot. That would be at least 40%, just like any other psychotherapy. Just holding the space and attending that space is 40% of the healing that can happen. So there's all of that. And I think that's something we've got to be a bit careful of in a kind of culture where it's about, you know, of culture of wellness and a culture of kind of anonymity. You know, having those deeper relationships with people that you're working with is really something to be valued. I don't know if that answers your question in the way that...
It's really, really helpful, because I think one of the things I take from your response is that it's about responsiveness and building trust and relating to folk, and that requires for the people who are sharing the practice to really feel it's something you can feel confidence and trust in yourself. So I'm really keen for, you know, it's based in people's own practice, but it's also to do with the freedom to actually relate to who is here with you now in the space or in the Zoom room. That's the other kind of interesting development recently. Yoga Nidra works well on Zoom, I believe, on online stuff, on Facebook stuff, but it's all about building a responsive relationship. And to me, that's one of the big shifts from the kind of teacher knows all, guru is God, do as you're told method of Nidra. And the kind of thing you're talking about is really very different from that, I hear.
Yeah, there's so much in what you're saying, you know, holding that space for people and allowing that. So this is one of the questions I come up with. Well, what, you know, why is Yoga Nidra such a healing, why does it have so much healing potential? And then it asks me that after the next question is, well, what are the best conditions for healing to take place? And how many of them are in Yoga Nidra, if not all of them? You know, so what are the best conditions, and how many of them in Yoga Nidra? That space, that sense of being centered and still, and trusting, and allowing your body to settle into something. And then what happens when you do that? And one of the things I often think about is having the atmosphere so that you can allow the body to do what it's going to do. Allow the mind to do what it's going to do. Allow the spirit to do what it's going to do, what the heart's going to do. So I kind of almost think about it a bit like harmonics on a piano or harmonics in music. I think this is, it might be interesting to get your feedback on this kind of idea I've got. You remember when CDs first came out? And people used to listen to LPs. Some of the younger generation might not get this at all, right? But in the olden days, we used to have a record player, right? And you put the record on, and it sounded beautiful and warm, and it was fantastic. And then CDs came out, and they were really clean, but there was something missing. So my first degree was in music, by the way, right? So, and one of the things I learned about was CDs, and this was really interesting to me, because the human ear can hear up to, say, about 20 kilohertz, right? And CDs produce sounds up to 20 kilohertz. So you should be able to hear everything, right? That's not the way it works. So I'll come back to Yoga Nidra in a second, right? So let's say, for instance, you play a note on a piano and you play it at the bottom end of the scale. Now you'll hear that note, but the harmonics of that sound will be heard here, here on the piano, way beyond the piano, way beyond what you can actually hear with your human ear. Does that make sense? There's harmonics of that note that go on and on and on. And the mere presence of that sound beyond what you can actually hear affects what you can hear. That's why CDs and LP sound different. So now let's think about this from a perspective of Yoga Nidra. Okay, so from a perspective of Yoga Nidra, we're existing on different levels of vibration, different sounds, different frequencies. We have the physical body vibrating at a certain frequency, which is very solid. But then we have chakras who are vibrating at different frequencies. We have memories, we have cognitions, we have emotions, we have sensations, all these different aspects working in different vibrational levels. So one of the things that happens to me with Yoga Nidra, and especially when you're in the healing process of, say, healing trauma or something like that, is that you might have a physical part of the body which is vibrating, but then you might have a memory or cognition also vibrating, but the two haven't been able to communicate to each other. They remain unresolved. They remain in disharmony. So through the practice of Yoga Nidra, when you have moments where what's happening physically meets maybe memory or thought, maybe meets feeling or sensation, and you get the three of those together, it can shift. Does that make sense? So yeah. Sensation, emotion, memory, when they meet, then that opens the conditions for that healing to take place.
Oh, this is beautiful. And I really love the work that you've done around music and Nidra and Raga and jazz. And there's a whole depth here, which we can't go into right now, but maybe we need another interview just on that. Because I wanted to hear from you when you say this, that healing occurs. Could you give us a few maybe brief little vignettes or thumbnails of healings that you've seen? Because I know you work in prison with inmates in prison. You've worked in rehab in the past. You work a lot with the NHS in your psychotherapy practice around depression. And yeah, do you want to give us a little snapshot of the kind of therapeutic applications of Yoga Nidra that you see happening in your work?
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, what might be quite good, there's some good stories in the research from 2013. And I think this kind of tells a few of the stories behind what happens. I don't know if it's even worth perhaps even reading one of the vignettes. How would that be? Would that be okay? It's just about 2 sentences or so, but I think it really sums it up. So somebody was talking about one of their memories in Yoga Nidra, and they've done some part of the visualization or some part of the pairs of opposites. It wasn't quite clear because it's kind of a dream thing. And this is what he said, right? He said, "I've imagined coming from an operation in a hospital and waking up in a great deal of pain. And I can hear people groaning, and I realize it's me. The person I thought someone is kicking off in this room, really groaning and moaning. I wonder who it is. I must be in the recovery room." And then eventually you realize it's you. For me, that would have been quite a traumatic experience at the time. But the whole disconnection from myself, because I'm practicing it in Yoga Nidra, because I'm remembering this in Yoga Nidra, I can look back on and think, yeah, that's my Yoga Nidra view of it. I wasn't traumatized by it anymore. I realized it was traumatic for me, or could have been, but I don't feel traumatized by it anymore. So that sense that you can have a different perspective on your own story, on your own memory, in Yoga Nidra, because you're able to sit back and watch it and witness it from a perspective which isn't painful, because you have a certain amount of ability to watch it.
Yeah.
You've got to build your time up to that experience. That ability to watch and witness is so important for those, you know, and that doesn't happen. I don't think it happens, well, overnight necessarily. I mean, sometimes people can have very profound healing very quickly. I've seen that too. But that to me really tells me one of the ways in which that it works, because you might have this memory, you might have some feeling around it, but you're able to watch it and observe it. You might have some sensations that you're watching as well, but the three of them put together, when they come together, and it might be just a moment, then suddenly they've resolved themselves. That note has been resolved, right? That chord, that harmony has been created through that pathway of being able to resolve what's going on physically on this vibration with what's happening emotionally in this vibration and what's happening cognitively, you know, and I think that's quite interesting with that. I think there's a lot more work that we can do around it. We need to have a lot more understanding about it. So people who are getting into Yoga Nidra and, you know, and you've got to kind of, it's something you're interested in, wow, go ahead, go study, go deep, go find out. Yeah. Because there's a lot much more that we can do with it, you know. Obviously, I've done a bit of work, but I will still say a bit of work, the whole body research behind it, the whole body of work behind it.
Oh, that's so moving, that vignette that you've shared with us, and I feel that it's a capacity. It's almost as if when we say it's a practice, we're practicing entering a certain state of consciousness that allows that witnessing to happen. And I wondered if you could speak. I remember you telling me when you first started working, I don't know if you were as an OT at that point, in a drug and alcohol rehab facility, and you said there was a guy with the DTs. He had the tremors, and he couldn't even like pick up a cup of tea because it would be, and I don't know if I remember this right, but what I remember is you talking to me about like one session of Yoga Nidra and the healing that happens in that session and how the doctors were amazed. Do you want to speak about that particular incident?
Oh, yeah. No, you know what? There's so many little stories like that. It's amazing. But yeah, I remember there was a guy, and I worked in a rehab unit for a little while, a drug and alcohol unit, and there was a guy, he couldn't settle at all. He was really struggling with DTs, like you say, and he couldn't even hold a cup of tea. And I said, look, you know, how do you fancy trying a bit of kind of something, you know, called Yoga Nidra with me? And he said, yeah, sure, fine. And we did it. But then we did maybe just a 10 or 15 minute settling of Yoga Nidra. And then he was just blown away. He just sat up. And as he came out of the Yoga Nidra, he just raised his hands up like this. And he looked at his hands, I just remember, and he just couldn't believe that he wasn't shaking. And he just sat down and had a cup of tea, and he was just in disbelief about, you know, the physical change it had made to him. But there's quite a few stories like that. It's a very, very powerful place to work. There was also, I remember doing some Yoga Nidra in a group with you know, some people who had really, really struggled and been in bad places in their lives. And I don't know if you've ever had this, when you're teaching Yoga Nidra, when the phone rang off in the room next door, you know, and one of the ladies during the Yoga Nidra, she got up, she answered the phone. And I was like, yeah, kind of part of me was going, oh, all right, okay. And then she put the phone down, and she came back in, she laid down, and then afterwards she wrote me a letter, the most beautiful letter I've ever had, just saying, I've never been so relaxed in my whole life. And it just reminded me that you just don't know what somebody's inner experience is. You just don't know. You know, so to be always kind of curious and not kind of assuming about how a practice might affect somebody. I did get another letter once from a guy in prison who said he'd done one Yoga Nidra. He only saw him once. He did one Yoga Nidra, and then he wrote me a letter, which eventually got to me, and he said he realized something in that, and he gave up a life of crime. That's what his letter said. You know, so you get all these kind of amazing stories, which is what really inspired the kind of research. You know, been other stories where there was a lady who'd had a really bad multiple sclerosis. I worked in a team, in a neurological disorder team. The lady had really bad multiple sclerosis, and she was in a wheelchair within 6 months of being diagnosed. Sorry, I'm getting confused with stories. This lady had a stroke, and she'd been told she was never going to breathe in her abdomen again. 18 months later, they thought, that's it. There's not any chance for recovery for this. 2 yoga nidras later, she was breathing abdominally and she was out and about walking as a result.
So they told her that she wasn't going to be able to breathe. What was the problem?
Abdominally, she'd never be able to breathe abdominally. She'd lost that connection
Okay.
to that part of her body. But within Yoga Nidra, we practiced abdominal breathing a couple of times and she was able to start breathing abdominally again. You know, so there's just so much about the space of Yoga Nidra. So much can happen. Things that, there's magic that can really happen.
Oh.
And I say that, but I say it with a scientific head. I'm constantly criticizing this and I'm constantly trying to look at it from different perspectives and go, hang on, it could have been this and it could have been that. So there's always that part of me there, but I'm also, there's a lot of potential and it does really validate a lot more kind of research and study. It really does.
And this is such a beautiful thing to hear. I love like that you say keep curious and keep critical and keep asking questions, and then we start to it's almost as if we continue with that research, we discover that there is a scientific basis for the magic. Like it's real because it happens. And like you and I have been at this Nidra stuff for a long time and I see that a lot of the magic is just from really paying attention to what's going on. And to see how we can bring it in to make it's so powerful and so valuable. I feel it should be accessible to everyone. And I wanted to kind of wind up our talk by really thinking about, I know you've been doing work within kind of equity and diversity and social justice within the National Health Service, it's a big issue. And I wondered if you could speak about like what needs to happen to make sure that this valuable tool is not the privileged elites thing only, that it can reach everyone who really deserves it. Yoga Nidra for the peoples. Do you speak about your recent work with it's within the NHS, this, isn't it? Yeah,
that's quite interesting because there's a lot of it is to do with infrastructure and also barriers to really wanting to make change. You know, I think we're at a very unique time at this time where there's a lot of discussion about making change, you know, in terms of Black Lives Matter, in terms of all that movement. And we've seen some progress in the 60s, but we've had opportunities in the 90s, and we've had opportunities now in the 2020s. We've got opportunity again. And the questions I really ask about this, and this is something where I think everybody can do something about wherever they work, wherever they're doing, whether they're teaching yoga, nidra or not, is just to be very critical about the power structures in there, and whether you're really looking at, to have a good think about the difference between equality, equity and justice. So in terms of Yoga Nidra, now this is the great thing, isn't it? And there's a lot of really good people with good intention working in yoga and Yoga Nidra practice. Wow, what could I say to them? Well, what you told me about your Yoga Nidra course is incredible. That's great. Actually shifting power to the people who have been affected, actually providing opportunities for access. So what can I say? What would I say? I'd probably say, don't treat everybody the same. That's what I'd probably say. Recognize that people have been through generations of trauma. And for that to work and heal, that, you know, that takes time, that takes energy, that takes commitment, that takes shift of power, that takes commitment, resource, all of those things. And you can't rely on people of color to be educating you. You have to be active and out there in the world and doing things. So with Yoga Nidra, now this is something really interesting, because it's a state that's evolved with everyone, but with yoga and Yoga Nidra, it's such an interesting dynamic, because there's got to be, so a lot of the work, there's an amazing lady, I don't know her, but I've seen some of her work, Susanna Barkateki, I think, if I'm saying that right from memory. But one thing she talks about in terms of that is just recognizing, because this is one of the things, okay, the post-lineage stuff, yes, absolutely, we need to think about that, but we also need to find a way of giving back to the people who have struggled to get that information out, that knowledge here. So I'm thinking about myself, I'm thinking about my ancestors, I'm thinking about all the struggles that they went to come here, and they're still facing their daily lives to get that knowledge here. So there needs to be some way of giving back to where that's come from, but also not getting caught up with all the kind of mire of where it's come from as well. So it's complicated and it's very personal. So I don't know if that's helpful, but hopefully that makes some sense. It's quite generic as opposed to kind of very specific, but hopefully it makes some sense.
Yeah. And I think that thank you so much, because like raising this idea of like really investigating the structures of power that we're invested in, and like call it out if it's not right, if someone's holding the power and the other people can't access the practice, if there are people not even getting into the space, who isn't in the room, who isn't there, and think about why that is. It's not just about diversity, it's about actually why does that stuff happen. And really I'm moved by this welcoming in of understanding generational trauma, intergenerational trauma, and to realize Yoga Nidra is a tool that can be so powerful for healing all kinds of things, as you've described, and it's precious and it's powerful, and we need to make sure that the people delivering it are awake to all of this. So that's part of my role as a trainer of Yoga Nidra teachers, and it's also really part of my role to network and bring people's attention to the work that you've been doing, for example, for all these years. So I'm going to wind up what's saying, and maybe we'll have a rematch and talk a bit more about the harmonics and the music, because part of what I've realized with Yoga Nidra that's gone on is that instrumentation has really helped me with the Nidra. I've got the hung pan, the chimes, the bowls, there's all, and I know you've done a lot of beautiful work with them, Indian raga and Nidra and things. So we'll recap another time on that. But right now, is there a final message that you might have for our Yoga Nidra community and teachers and trainees, and how we can actually really free up the healing power of Yoga Nidra as a tool for justice and healing? Well, go on then.
What an amazing community, what amazing work that you're doing with that, giving people that space to bring the experience, to donate their work, for people to access it. I mean, how many people are coming and using that website now? I don't know, but it's what a fantastic resource. Please keep going, keep doing it. I'm sure it's making a difference to so many people's lives. We know it is. Even one practice can really shift things. So keep going. Thank you. And thank you.
Bless you. I like a final code. When we were looking, I don't know, 2011 we set up the Nidra Network site. We've been teaching for a long time, and I was looking for a name for it. And it was Ramdas. You were the one who said network. We were looking for getting a domain name, and it was Yoga Nidra this, Yoga Nidra Central, Yoga Nidra, and you were like, keep it as a network, because you know how we work. We know each other from way back with all our camps and everything. So network, open, flatten network, and dismantle the abusive structures of power, and then we can all be free. So I'm going to wind this up with great respect and love. I honor my heart, my inner teacher. My heart sings to talk to my dear friend and colleague here, and I'm going to say goodbye. Yoga Nidra Network.org is where we have all our free nidras, and the Yoni Shakti the movement.com is where you can sign up your support globally to eradicate the abuse of women in yoga and to reclaim yoga more generally as a tool for healing, justice and freedom. Would you like to say a final word, dear Ramdas, and tell people where they can connect with you if that's what you'd like?
Oh yeah, how can people connect to me? There'll be a new website coming out at some point soon. When it does, I'll put it on the network. But yeah, you can find me on the Yoga Nidra Network. I'm on the Facebook group. Especially if anybody's doing any research or anything like that, or want some support with it, any ideas or discussing things through, I'd be really, really happy to talk to you about that. And thanks, Uma, for having me on your channel. Much appreciated, and with lots of love and respect to you as well.
Blessings, with great respect and love, honouring my heart, my inner teacher. Big up to Ramdas. Thank you, lovely. I'm going to stop this recording now and share it far and wide. Here we go. Hang on a minute. That's it. Let's do that. Stop. As I say, yeah. Stop recording. And